At the outset of the preliminary hearing, the atmosphere in the cavernous courtroom crackled with anticipation. Reporters jostled for position behind the yellow tape, cameras whirred, and bailiffs lined the walls like silent sentinels. Grace Buckingham, flanked by her court-appointed counsel, shuffled to the stand with vacant eyes, her posture rigid as though she were a marionette whose strings had been abruptly cut. When the prosecutor pressed her to state her name, Grace's voice emerged soft and uncertain. I don't know," she murmured. A gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by an uncomfortable hush. "And do you recall performing the surgery on Mr. Spencer?" The prosecutor probed further. Grace's brow furrowed in confusion. "There was a surgery," she asked, marveling at her own ignorance. "I can't remember." At that moment, the judge, stern and unsmiling, banged his gavel. "This court finds that the defendant is exhibiting signs of dissociative amnesia, unable to recall her identity or the actions attributed to her," he pronounced, voice echoing against the polished wood. "I hereby order an immediate neuropsychiatric evaluation and real-time electroencephalographic monitoring to determine the veracity of her claimed memory loss." As murmurs spread among observers, news flashes began appearing on the courtroom monitors. Grace Buckingham claims total memory loss. Judge orders brain scan. Within hours, Finn and Bridget convened in a discreet room wired to the hospital's neurodiagnostic suite. Monitors displayed Grace's brainwaves as the patient lay under observation in a locked medical facility wing, her vitals stable, her expression blank as though in a waking dream. Finn, already pale from sleepless nights, stared at the EEG tracings, alpha waves, beta waves, theta and delta patterns, all exhibiting precisely the normal complexity expected of a healthy adult. "She's not dissociated," Finn muttered, voice tight with disbelief. "This is a performance." Bridget's eyes narrowed in determination. "Then we'll catch her in the act. We'll give her every opportunity to slip up, to prove her memory is intact when her ego overrides her active amnesia." They devised a plan to fabricate a hot news segment. Footage of Liam Spencer striding into the operating theater just days after his near-fatal collapse, greeting the surgical team with a steady smile, declaring himself fully recovered, his voice strong, his gait confident. The segment would run on every major network's medical news feed. "Miracle recovery. Liam Spencer walks again," with specific emphasis on attributing his revival to the experimental serum Grace had claimed to have administered. Finn and Bridget edited the clip to include mocking subtitles such as "Grace was right all along" and "Who's laughing now, Bill?" Then arranged for it to be leaked to the court's observation suite viewing system moments before Grace's scheduled EEG session in the judicial medical wing. Back in the secured observation room, Grace lay under a soft lamp's glow, electrodes affixed to her scalp, wires coiling like vines across the examination table. The medical consultant hovered, adjusting the settings on the EEG machine as the clock ticked toward the designated time. Finn and Bridget donned court-mandated visitor gowns and gloves before entering the room, their expressions grave but resolute. They found Grace staring blankly at the ceiling, her lips parted as though awaiting a cue. Minutes later, the court technician wheeled in a rolling monitor and connected it to the room's audio-visual feed. Finn pressed play on the tablet, and the lights dimmed as the forged news clip burst onto the screen. Grace's gaze snapped to the monitor, Liam's confidence dried, the surgical instruments clattering in the background, his voice declaring, "Thanks to Dr. Buckingham's groundbreaking serum, I'm back on my feet." The framed shot of Bill Spencer frowning in courtroom stills filled the screen as the subtitle scrolled, "Grace exposes Spencer's lies." In that instant, something shifted in Grace's eyes. The blankness receded, replaced by a flicker of triumph. She craned her neck to watch every detail, lips parting in a crooked smile. A flush crept into her cheeks, and she sat up, brushing electrodes from her hair with a swift, self-assured motion. So they finally wake up to the truth," she said aloud, voice cool and measured. "They think they can keep me trapped, but I'll show them how deep the web goes." Unbeknownst to Grace, the EEG monitor recorded every spike of neural activity as her defenses collapsed and her authentic self emerged. The brainwave tracings danced with heightened beta patterns, the unmistakable signature of excitement and self-reflexive cognition, proof that she recognized herself and reveled in her own cunning. But Grace was too wrapped up in her own performance to notice the subtle grin flickering on Bridget's lips or the barely controlled exultation in Finn's eyes. Rising from the table, electrodes dangling from her scalp like a perverse crown, she strode to the glass observation window where behind one-way glass Bill Spencer, flanked by his legal team and an assortment of investigators, watched with satisfaction. Grace tapped on the glass, her silhouette framed by the post-op lights. "Bill," she called out, loud enough for the microphone to pick up every inflection, "did you really think you could outrun me? I almost admired your tenacity. Hiring every PI in LA, coercing the police, staging my corpse, but none of it mattered. I faked my death, I staged the explosion, I even manipulated the medical tests, and yet you keep bawling like a child because you wanted to be the hero. Newsflash, I'm still here, and I'll keep playing this game until you're begging for mercy." Her voice rang with feral delight as she paced before the window. "You see that clip? Liam's alive because of me. Deacon's liver regenerates because of me. You're nothing but a pawn in my design, and I've already moved on from obsolete pieces." She laughed, a clear, triumphant spat that echoed unnervingly through the observation room speakers. "Enjoy this cage, Bill, because I own the key. And if you think the judge can sentence me when I have the evidence in my hands, you're sadly mistaken. I'll testify against your every corrupt move. So go ahead, order more scans, assign more psychiatrists. It won't change the fact that I'm the one calling the shots." At that moment, a hush fell over the court observers who had gathered behind Bill, editors, reporters, legal aides, all mouths agape. On the screen beside the EEG tracings, the graph quivered, beta waves spiking into uncanny regularity. Dr. Chandrasekhar, the court-appointed neuropsychiatrist, scribbled notes, no signs of dissociation. Fully alert cognitive patterns. Evidence of deliberate performance. He tapped his pen against the clipboard, nodding solemnly at the judge's clerk. The judge, watching through the secure monitor, cleared his throat. "Counsel," he said, voice firm, "the record shall reflect that the defendant's claim of amnesia is unsubstantiated by neurological data and that she has just confessed to intentional manipulation of evidence and obstruction of justice. Bailiff, detain Ms. Buckingham immediately for contempt of court." The gavel thundered as bailiffs burst through the observation room's door to seize Grace. She raised a defiant eyebrow, turning to them with anticipation, as though she had expected the coup all along. "Oh, you're going to lock me up? I'd like to see you try," she taunted, hands clenched at her sides. And so, in a single, breathtaking gambit, Finn and Bridget transformed Grace's own hubris into her downfall. The fabricated video that played to her vanity brought her out of hiding, the EEG that revealed her truth, and the live confession before her nemesis sealed her fate. As bailiffs cuffed her wrists behind her back, Grace's expression flickered with a new emotion, a spark of fear, as though she realized for the first time that her greatest weapon had become her greatest vulnerability. Behind her, Bill allowed himself a tight, controlled smile. The trap had sprung, the evidence was irrefutable, and the bold and the beautiful crime queen had finally been caught red-handed. Yet even as she was led away, Grace's head remained high, her eyes meeting Bill's through the glass one last time, promising that this was only one round in a war without end. By the time the bailiffs led Grace Buckingham from the observation suite, her wrists bound by silver handcuffs that gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, the courtroom corridors thrummed with whispers and rising outrage. Reporters clamored to capture her first public words as she strode past, her head held high, the electrode's sticky residue still trading faint electrical twinges across her brow. And the assembled press outlets speculated on her next move even as the judge's gavel cemented her detention for contempt and obstruction of justice. Bill Spencer, standing just beyond the glass wall of the secure observation room, allowed himself a measured nod. His plan had succeeded brilliantly. The trap he and Finn and Bridget had laid using Grace's own vanity and her meticulously forged hot news clip now animating into irrefutable proof of her deceit. But even as he tipped his hat to his allies, private investigators smirking, legal counsel flicking through BP's dossier on Buckingham's financial machinations, and a smattering of uniformed officers who had never before felt such elation in serving subpoenas, he understood that the war was far from over. Grace Buckingham's act of dissociative amnesia now punctured like a paper balloon. Her true self had flashed back into existence on national television, her confession playing on a loop in newsrooms across the country, yet her pregnancy. The final revelation caught in the warehouse ambush promised to rip open fault lines neither Bill nor the courts could easily tame. Within hours, Grace was transferred to Metropolitan Women's Detention Center, a stark concrete facility where the echo of clanging cell doors greeted new arrivals before they even stepped inside. She was booked on multiple charges: fraud, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, reckless endangerment of patient health, and contempt of court, and assigned a cell in the high-security wing reserved for white-collar prisoners whose crimes blurred the lines between corporate greed and medical malfeasance. The prenatal exam conducted upon her admission confirmed the news broadcast in the warehouse. Grace was approximately 12 weeks pregnant. The attending physician, bound by medical ethics even within the penal system, provided her with immediate prenatal vitamins and arranged for regular obstetric evaluations, but the facility director, under direct orders from Bill Spencer's legal team, limited in-person visitation to a twice-weekly appointment monitored by correctional officers with full audio and video recording. Grace maintained her composure as she was led to her cell. A tidy room with a narrow cot, a small desk, and a barred window overlooking the prison yard, but when the door clanged shut behind her, she leaned against the cold steel and let her composure crack. Back in the public eye, Paris Buckingham and Liam Spencer wrestled with the fallout as Bill Spencer orchestrated a full-scale media campaign painting Grace as a calculating monster who had toyed with life and death and now, with a child on the way, sought to manipulate public sympathy. Bill arranged exclusive interviews in high-profile outlets, leaked sanitized reports suggesting that the unborn child might be removed from Grace's custody at birth and placed in foster care, and floated legal motions for emergency guardianship under the pretext of protecting the fetus from a high-risk criminal environment. Paris, anguished but resolute, refused to let her mother's child become collateral damage. She partnered with Liam's seasoned family attorney to file a competing motion for temporary guardianship, arguing that no matter Grace's crimes, her unborn child had the right to life, medical care, and consideration from the one person in the world best suited to provide it, Paris herself. Liam offered to stand as co-guardian, drawing on the compassion that had once driven him to forgive Grace's lesser misdeeds, and together they prepared affidavits from Finn and Bridget attesting to the care Grace had provided to Deacon after his initial collapse, an attempt to show the judge that Grace, for all her sins, had acted out of a twisted but genuine desire to heal. In the days that followed, the court of public opinion seethed. Editorial boards debated the ethics of imprisoning a pregnant woman and of potentially separating mother and child before birth. Social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForGrace and #SaveTheBabyBuckingham as polarized factions claimed her either as a martyr or a monster. Meanwhile, inside the detention center, Grace lay in her cot, tracing the faint curve of her abdomen with trembling fingers, imagining the life growing within her even as the walls pressed closer. She had expected to face Bill Spencer's legal might, to endure months of trial and potential decades behind bars, but she had not anticipated the vulnerability of pregnancy, how each kick, each flutter, could pierce her bravado with a reminder of what she still stood to lose. She spent hours pacing the tiny cell, rehearsing her defense, promising herself that she would not let her child inherit the burden of her legacy. When the weekly prenatal appointment arrived, she donned the plain gray prison uniform and walked through the intake area with the same fierce dignity that had once made her clinic the envy of medical elites. Nurses exchanged sympathetic glances, and a guard lowered his tone when announcing her presence in the examination room. Grace closed her eyes as the ultrasound technician applied the gel and pressed the wand to her belly. The screen flickered to life with grainy black and white shapes that resolved into the tiny pulse of a heartbeat, steady, defiant, and indelible proof that she had succeeded where her enemies would see only a crime. At the Spencer mansion, Bill Spencer convened an emergency meeting of his inner circle, his head of legal, the PR firm handling crisis communications, his network of private investigators, and his son Liam. Bill announced that the guardianship hearing would take place within 24 hours, an unprecedented pace, reflecting both the high stakes and Bill's desire to strike while the iron was hottest. He tasked his attorneys with drafting a scathing petition arguing that Grace had proven herself unfit to parent. She had endangered patients' lives, manipulated evidence, and broken every oath she once swore in white coats. They would portray Paris as an enabling daughter who stood complicit in her mother's crimes. They would raise the specter of hereditary insanity to prop up Grace's prior claim of dissociative amnesia. And they would petition the judge to grant immediate custody to Bill himself, citing his unquestionable financial stability and moral rectitude as the only guarantee of the child's welfare. Liam bristled at this, reminding his father that Paris had every right to seek guardianship and that opposing her in court might fracture the family beyond repair. Bill waved away his son's concerns. In court, loyalty is irrelevant, he snapped. Power and proof win every time. Across town at the courthouse, the guardianship hearing convened before Judge Marisol Alvarez, renowned for her fair-handed but exacting rulings in high-profile family law cases. Paris, immaculate in a navy pantsuit, stood at the lectern flanked by Liam, Finn, and Bridget. Their attorney presented medical records, affidavits, and character references, weaving a narrative of redemption and hope. That Grace's child deserved a chance to grow up knowing love, not in a foster system or behind bars, but with a mother's reflection in her toddler's eyes, even if mediated through supervised visits in visiting rooms lined with plexiglass. Bill's attorney countered with a litany of Grace's offenses, projected clips of her confession footage, and argued that the detention center offered no prenatal negligence and yet contained her from further criminal activity. Bill himself remained in the gallery, arms folded, eyes unblinking, as reporters scribbled furiously and cameras pivoted to capture his stone-faced profile. When both sides rested, Judge Alvarez cleared the courtroom and deliberated alone. The tension among the parties was so thick that outside the courtroom doors, security guards stepped between press encampments to prevent scuffles among supporters. Paris gripped Liam's hand under the bench. Finn and Bridget exchanged tense nods. Bill took a final sip of water and straightened his tie. After an hour, the bailiff returned to call the court back to order. Judge Alvarez, appearing behind the bench at last, adjusted her glasses and regarded the assembled litigants with measured authority. This court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances of this case, she began, her voice firm but not unkind. She acknowledged Grace's criminal conduct and the public interest in protecting the child. She also noted the best interest of the child doctrine and the compelling testimony about Paris's capability and support network. Therefore, she pronounced, I hereby grant temporary guardianship of the unborn child to Ms. Paris Buckingham, with Mr. Liam Spencer as co-guardian. This guardianship shall remain in effect until such time as Grace Buckingham is released from custody or until further order of this court. The Department of Child and Family Services is directed to facilitate supervised visitation for Grace, provided that she adheres to all institutional rules and participates in court-approved parenting and substance abuse counseling programs. A murmur swept through the courtroom, a mixture of relief, disappointment, triumph, and dread. Bill Spencer's face darkened. He rose from his seat and strode from the gallery without offering Paris any acknowledgement, calculated to convey both disappointment in the ruling and the unspoken threat that he would continue to fight this battle by any means necessary. Outside the courtroom, Paris exhaled and Liam squeezed her hand in solidarity. Finn fought back tears of relief and Bridget managed a tentative smile. For the first time in months, they felt a measure of victory. Grace's child would be born into a stable, caring environment, and Paris would safeguard her her mother's legacy of life, even as Grace served her sentence. Yet the victory was bittersweet. Grace Buckingham remained in custody, her sentence pending a full trial that would almost certainly end in decades behind bars. The child's father remained a secret. Grace had refused to name him at her arraignment, and rumors swirled. Was it Finn, compelled by guilt and compassion? Was it an anonymous contact she had met in the fugitive's safe house? Or had she engineered an impossible paternity to protect her unborn from both predators and protectors? Bill Spencer's legal team continued to investigate, delving into cell phone records, hotel logs, and DNA databases in an effort to unmask the father and thus gain further leverage over Grace. Paris, torn between hope and dread, vowed privately that she would protect the child's identity until the girl was old enough to choose for herself. As the courtroom emptied and the cameras blinked off, the whirlwinds of power and family hardened once more. Bill Spencer retreated to his office, his mind already plotting the next strike. Paris and Liam gathered with Finn and Bridget in a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria, their conversation hushed but determined.